Okay, it's 1 p.m. in Germany, and thank you for tuning in for the research session today with Margarita Osipova. And she talks about the problem of women's safety in cities, because this is a major issue in cities all over the world. And the use of technology could create a safer environment. And this is what Margarita is researching right now. She's a student of human-computer interaction at the Bauhaus University Weimar, and is investigating as part of her master thesis how technology could create a safer environment. And she shares today her findings with us, and how MAXDAYS is supporting her in her ongoing research. So have fun and feel free to ask questions at the end of the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for introducing me. And yeah, it was actually my thesis, and this whole research was sponsored by MAXDAYS grant this year, which was meant for empowering women. And it's amazing, and I'm beyond grateful. So now I will share the presentation and I will start the talk. And I think now the wrong part is shared because you can't see it in full screen. Give me a moment. Yeah, now it should be full screen. Perfect. So hello again. Thanks for joining in. My topic of research in general and topic of my thesis was to explore how smart city technology can help women to feel safer in the cities, because technology is a huge support in terms of safety and feeling safe, which people use all over already. And I just wondered, maybe we can do something for a specific question of women's safety, which is a huge issue all over. So the problem is really a big one, because according to United Nations research, every third woman in the world experiences some sort of harassment or even sexual abuse during the lifetime. And unfortunately, this problem, while being severely underreported, still makes this big numbers. It definitely should be addressed somehow. And one of the biggest parts of this is city, because cities have a lot of different people and a lot of unsafe spots. And statistically, also, most of the harassment happens during transportation while women travel from one place to another. And researchers already look into how technology can help. So one of the findings that exists already is that, for example, having cameras around the city can be quite helpful for women to feel safer. And many other technologies are also introduced, yet at the end of the day, we're still not having environments where women do not feel threatened by going somewhere alone. And of course, the differences differs from place to place, but altogether, pretty much in every city, there are spots where women avoid going, or regardless of are there some technology in that place or are there some safety measures, women just try not to get themselves alone in that place, whatever happens. So my research question is phrased that what is common and what is different in the expectations from smart city technology in regard of safety from women around the world? And I phrase my question this way because it's already known that the problem exists. And it's already more or less well known that the problem is usually in the dark places or places that have no people around. But when we turn into the domain of technology that can help to make the situation better, it's still quite unclear how do we find the solution? How do we try to format what this technology should do that the situation is not that bad, and that it's not only using the victim-based approach when the person, in our case, woman, has to do something herself to try to protect her and to like ask technology to do something, but she actually is being protected, as there is lower probability of the problem happening, and that women will feel that. So when we look at from this standpoint, it becomes very interesting to look at how it differs between different places and how it actually ties to some particular place in the world, because there is no universal solution, and we need both methods and understandings of what are actual expectations from smart city tech that women apply, so this technology is actually useful. And for this, I would like to introduce a concept. It's from Barzell from 2010, which is widely used in my research field. My research field is human-computer interaction, and this is feminist human-computer interaction qualities, which state how the design of technology should go, basically by involving women more, by advocating for right meanings, embodying them, by understanding the environment where the application will be used, by understanding how the whole solution will be working, not just as a concept, but in practical way, that the solutions take not a standard person into the account of the user, but actually involve different perceptions, different people. And I used co-design method to research my original question. And I'll here come back a bit to the topic of why smart cities. This is the technological field that is still pretty much in the developing phase. And right now there is not much out there that we can use as an example, or as that we can directly go and test and ask people, like to do post tests or something like that. So we are working with something that is not existent yet, and that we are basically, as humans, as people living in this century, are designing by our actions. So co-design method is the method that allows you to dig into things that are not there and to brainstorm about them by asking your participants to imagine the places, imagine the situations, discuss them, and ideate from the standpoint of being in some sort of imaginary scenario that they defined. So basically, this whole process was structured around that, starting from getting my participants to know each other, because it was a group study that I did, several group studies, and then they defined what problems they have in their city, defined one problem that they wanted to work further on, and after me introducing a bit more what smart city is, they ideated concepts, ideas, and at the end I asked them to get their ideas together to the concept that they can kind of go to their city council and present. So who were the participants? I focused on women because I was often asked the question, why just women, why not men as well? And the problem here is that many cities and many city councils have in general more men already involved, and it's important to first just start involving women into these questions. So I had participants who were over 18 years old and who lived in their specific cities for more than a year, and if moved out less than 3 months ago. And I ended up having 8 focus groups with 2 participants in each. And 3 of these focus groups were for Berlin, 3 for Cairo, and 2 for Melbourne. And I chose these cities from the Smart City Index rating from 2021. And I took only big cities because they behave differently. So I tried to get cities from different parts of the list. So you see Melbourne is on the top part, Berlin is somewhere from the middle, Cairo is closer to the bottom. And also cities with different layout, different background, culture, everything. So the results can actually show the differences. And because if we would take one city in 2 cities in one country, yeah, they will be different cities, but sometimes the culture background will be the same. So the whole comparison will not work out that well. And for these studies in the cities, I gathered audio data, because while with participants we were going through this whole process of co-design, they were discussing problems, discussing solutions, everything. And while I had a lot of information visually on that Miro board that you saw before, like this layout, I decided to analyze text, like transcripts, textual data from all of the studies, because then I have gotten more intense, like more dense and interesting insights from what was discussed and beyond what was just put on the board during the creative process. So, and for this I used MAXDAYS. I will focus in this presentation a little bit more on how MAXDAYS can help me and can help others in research like this, because analyzing co-design studies, it's quite a lot of work because every study is like 2 hours long and you have a lot of data and you cannot get through it without any technological support. So this was the first part. I uploaded everything to MAXDAYS and structured it so I always have all my information at hand while I'm analyzing it. And then I used standard coding, like I started with open coding, running through all my data, and I put them in the bucket codes, problems, contexts, safety strategies, solutions, and hesitations about solutions that women had. Because basically the goal of the study was to find more information about what solutions women want. But it turned out that without understanding the previous parts, like what are the problems actually? How do they differ between cities? Is the context different? Like, do people use more cars or public transport? Safety strategies is the thing that I did not expect to find, but I found that there was a prominent theme always there, where women discussed how they try to avoid the problem already. And it was often discussed with either the problems themselves or the solution ideas. So this is how I approached my data, basically. And then from open coding, I went to creative coding. You probably already heard a lot during this conference on what is creative coding or what are other things, how you can like group and regroup your codes, and it was very helpful. So I grouped my open codes like by buckets, problems, context, etc. And then I opened every bucket in creative coding and created like this crazy mind map of what is the underlying theme under one topic or like one group of codes or another group of codes. And I ended up with basically underlying concepts for every segment. So for the problems, it was, for example, the problem/fear that when women feel that they cannot protect themselves from danger, or when they feel trapped, or when they say that they cannot specially avoid the problem. And it's still quite problematic things, but here they are. I managed to group them not just by, okay, it was this dark street and this thing happening, but what is underlying issue going on. And now we move to the results outline, because at first I tried to introduce what was in the data. And in the results, at first I will highlight what were the patterns in data altogether, then compare cities briefly, and then go into a bit more feminist part of like what is the smart city solution from the standpoint of women should look like. And of course, feel free to like write down your questions to ask them afterwards, because I have way too much information and too little time to give insights on absolutely everything I want to say. So we start with patterns in data. This is quite an amazing tool from MAXDAYS that I'm really glad that I had at the point of analysis, because I was using quite a novel method. It's like not novel in the understanding of existing, but it's not very often used for such pure technical topics like smart cities. And this is basically how my data, how my studies were structured, and it helped me not only to see and to understand where, like how well I managed to run the co-design sessions with like part discussing problems, part discussing solutions, but also to see which codes go together. Because when you see on the below part of the slide, this is a matrix of codes split by every study. So B is for Berlin, C is for Cairo, M is for Melbourne. And this allowed me to understand how things worked and how the studies went. So first that, for example, codes are quite similarly distributed, and it doesn't matter for which city it was done. but what actually differs is the density of codes and existence of some follow-up codes like safety strategies, because people were not asked directly to discuss them. And when I look at my images on the right and I look at my matrix of codes, like how many codes from each category was there, I realized that the studies that were shorter in time, this data I had as a separate table, they turned out just to have way less data. And the studies that were not very interactive, where people, for example, didn't put things on the board, they also happened to be less intense in amount of data and codes in there. Then I looked at how this worked for whole cities on the level of themes within every bucket, and turned out that for the problems specifically, the biggest problems, the most mentioned problems, were present in all cities, and in all cities that they had the biggest numbers, even though cities are like in completely different places and have completely different lifestyles. But when we go to the safety strategies and also then to the solutions, it happened that it was a bit different picture, that they differed between the cities more significantly. So I found that the discussed solutions and discussed safety strategies related to the problem that was chosen on the step of scenario. And that was always the problem that was mentioned the most for the city. So it just, it may sound obvious, but it's amazing to see that through this method and through this way of analysis, these things can be clearly found out and supported, not just by I saw this pattern in data and I think it exists, to actual proof of that. Yeah, it is there, and I'm not lying to myself, and I can back up every sentence I say. And now we move to the comparison of the cities. First, the problems. For Berlin, Melbourne, and Cairo, the problems might have looked alike when we look at just overarching themes, but after looking into it, turned out that for all of them, it were completely different underlying layers. So for example, in Berlin, one of the biggest problem mentioned was underground traveling by U-Bahn and strange people under some influence like drugs and stuff, or homeless people. While for Melbourne, it was in general getting home safe, regardless, be that transport or walking or taxis. Actually, taxis was not much mentioned for Berlin at all as a context. And for Cairo, the biggest problem was harassment, especially verbal harassment on the streets. And if we go up to the layer of the problems, the underlying thing is the same. It's like harassment or unwanted attention. But when we look at the precise issues and where is it happening, it's so different, and it just cannot be compared while we say it is harassment. Now, we should always understand what exactly is going on there, because there is a difference between physical harassment and verbal harassment and cultural harassment that causes the problem that you cannot protect yourself because government is not helping women much. So this is very important finding of the whole study. Next, that biggest problems define strategies altogether, because usually if there is a big problem in the city, women try to avoid it by all means, like in everything they do. And also that strategies that women use also are quite similar. But again, when we look at the context, it will look quite different. So to illustrate this, for example, if in Berlin you have unwanted attention from strange people, you can just try to ignore them and pass them by, because you know that they probably wouldn't follow you much far from that station where they hang out. While in Cairo, it was terrible on the hand that men can literally follow women to their homes. So the same strategy also, like of trying to avoid men, would have absolutely different form, basically. So from here, I'll move to the solutions, because time is running and we always can go back. In the solutions, it was also interesting to see how they were oriented towards specific thing and specific strategies that women use already. So for example, as you remember, for Berlin, strange people approaching was the biggest problem, and strategy to avoid them somehow was in the core of all solutions that women proposed. So they tried to ask for like either separate spaces or change the layouts of the whole train, or having more cameras, but with consent, not just cameras all over. For Melbourne, the idea was to have technological monitoring of getting home safe, and the technology like tracking or smart identification of emotions and things was offered. And also interesting for Melbourne, I'll use cameras here for the medium of privacy thing, because it's a huge question. Yeah, they tried to avoid cameras altogether. And when moving to Cairo, the idea was to arrest the harasser, because there the problem was not just harassment, but also that harassers go unpunished. And they wanted technology, like cameras, wanted technology to report things more. So it's also interesting to see how strategies, biggest problems start to influence the solution. So if we talk about feminist smart city solutions, it's important to acknowledge that even though technological ideas can overlap, and in all studies there were like ideas like alarm buttons, tangible technology, cameras, tracking, everything, it's always important to look into the context and how it will be actually used and in which situations, because alarm buttons for all three cases looked different, and they had different goals at the end. So you cannot create feminist solution without getting into understanding on how it looks specifically in this city, how women feel, what are their problems, what do they fear the most. And it's also important to understand some cause-effect relation, like culture, laws, historical development of the city layout, demographics. Because if we take Berlin, there are a lot of people who come from all over the world, and sometimes they do not speak German. And solutions for that place should also take that into account, that if you want to report something, or if something is going on, or the women should be notified about something, it should be in different languages, for example. While for other cities, it can be done, but it might not be as important as for Berlin. So yeah, it's never just the plain solution of we think that is it, and women ask for it. It's always many layers and many aspects to it. And the second part is that in all studies, women wanted 4 aspects to the solutions, namely having preventive measures, the measures that happen before the problem occurs. So basically, they reduce the probability of the issue. For example, not having that many strange people entering the trains, or having different layout of the seating, or maybe informing or having like better navigation system underground. And finally, it's not always about technology, and smart city can be not city full of cameras. It could be city done for people and designed for people's needs. Next are reactive measures, and technology was more involved here. For example, if a problem is already happening, how the whole system will react. Will somebody be called? Will the recording start? Will the report be sent? Something like that. Then system adjustments are the solutions that ask for the whole system to approach problems differently. So it's that it should be reliable police, that there should be laws that protect women who say, hey, there is a harasser or, I don't know, stalker, and I want to report it. There should be ways to do this. And moving to the reporting part, it's a special, very interesting finding of this particular study, that it's very important for women to have support if problem happens at the end, and that they do not have to relive all the issues that they already had to go through because somebody came and said threw bad words at them or something worse occurred. So these are the 4 pillars of what feminist smart city solutions should have. And here I want to reiterate that feminists and smart, it's not exactly about women only and technology only. It's the design of the city and design of the solutions and technological solutions included that just take into the account what people need, people want, and what is the local context there. So moving to the conclusions, these 4 key factors are the most important to always pay attention to and to fit them into the local context. Next is that inclusive solutions can and should be created by involving women early on. And the idea of feminist HCI qualities can be a base for it, which was basically a base for my study design. And because co-design as a method already fulfills a lot of requirements of what feminist HCI is by involving women, by asking them to imagine the situation, etc. So for all those who do research in this domain or in general technology domain or any other, you can just always look at that and see how you can implement it a bit more in your research studies, what you're doing. And lastly, that co-design method altogether helps to get deep insights on problems like this. So yeah, I wouldn't hold it for any longer. And just some takeaways regarding the MAXDAYS is that qualitative research can be hard to carry on, but analyzing results, it's just so worth it to see how it turns in the end, because no interviews can give you the same thing, and tools like MAXDAYS and MAXDAYS in particular, in my case, because I honestly love it, gives such wonderful tools to look at your data from such different angles, and even you first feel that your data is completely unstructured, you at the end start to see how it works, how you can get insights from there. It's amazing, and I can highly recommend it on this regard. And maybe some interesting note that working through your codes with different tools going from high to low levels, from top abstractions to particular exact codes, will open also new perspectives on what data you have. So try it out, maybe in several rounds. That also does worth it. And yeah, maybe final note that feminism and research is about inclusivity altogether. It's not just women, even though it might seem so from this research, but it's about including all parties that are interested in the solution in the early stage. So at the end, nobody is excluded, and it's just in this particular case, it's important to think about women in particular, because women's ways of navigating city can be quite different from men's, and often it was historically somehow forgotten while cities were planned, etc. So yeah, don't take it as women only. It should be inclusive for everybody. It's just a starting point there. And I would be glad to answer all your questions. Thanks for listening. Okay, I think there's a Q&A section. Could you talk more about colorful graphics on the slide, parents and data? What each dot square represent? Sure. Now we will have to run back. So here you can see colors of my bucket themes, like problems, context, safety, strategies, solutions. And blue was for problems, green and other random colors like brown or turquoise were for, or green, yeah, they were for context aspects, yellow for safety strategies, and pink for solutions. and red for hesitations about solutions. Hesitations were like, if women say, okay, we want cameras, but then like, oh, and who will have access to this data? And all those like self-questioning was put into this category. And this just helps a lot to see your data at a glance, how the density of codes changes and all those little things. So I wouldn't go too much into detail because it will be so specific for every study, but for me, it was a huge help in terms of understanding of my data structure and how some codes relate to one another, which go together, which do not go together that much. You can do this with other ways, but I think having all your codes at glance, it's wonderful and super duper helpful. Next question. Each column, each person, not follow. Probably I will get back to this question later. How did you deal with trans women in the sampling or study design? Originally, if we go back to the requirements to the participants, I said that, like I stated it specifically, that women are born as female and presenting being perceived as women. Being perceived meant that if women decide, like, I'm trying to find proper inclusive words right now. So even if women consider, like, the human considers gender not being female, but other people perceive this human as woman, I still wanted to include this people into this study. Unfortunately, it turned out to be crazy hell task to find participants in other cities where you don't live. So at the end, final sample, I did not have people who were not female. I had 2 participants who in the demographics questionnaire did not state their gender at all, but I can't give you anything else. But honestly, if this was like, I think I would continue this research further on. And I really, really, really want to include trans women, include people of different genders, but who are perceived as women here, because I think the problems are more or less the same, and they just go with perceived gender. So yeah, thanks for asking. It's a really important question. Patterns in data graphics. Patterns in data graphics. Maybe in here, the table, columns represent each study. So first study for Berlin, second study for Berlin, third study for Berlin, etc. And here, each column represents all studies for particular city summed up. I did not have a split by participants. Regarding patterns in data feature, did you find it helpful? Please provide some example on how you interpreted the charts. I hope these slides will be sufficient to answer this question. So how I interpreted these results, it was which problems were mentioned the most. Then I go into the breakdowns of what particular codes were mentioned there. I looked for patterns of how things relate to each other. So some of it was done manually, honestly, because sometimes you do not know what to ask and what to... So you try to get some insight from data. Back here, squares. What the squares mean? Every square is code with its color. So basically here it's just a layout of which codes were in this study, and they just color coded and put into the rows. So if we would have gone through the text itself, it would have been just colors changing or colors being like for the same segment. So that's where sometimes there is yellow in the middle of blue, etc. So I hope that answered it. Did you have recommending coding structure for GBV and its relation to city sanitation. I'm sorry, I cannot decode the abbreviation, but what I can say, I can give a bit more insights on how it all ended up relating to the city structure. I don't know what GBV is, I'm sorry. But if I talk about the general relation to how the city works and things like that, it was very interesting to see what are the prominent transportation means for the city, what are the cultural gender-based violence. Oh, thank you. Did you have? Sorry, I'm taking a minute here to understand the question. Oh, I cannot recommend any coding structure for gender-based violence because basically in this study I went from data and tried to see what codes are already there, and then I looked at it from like my research question and by these segments of problems, context, and solutions, because this was how I splitted my research question to be able to compare it between the cities, not as like something super duper big, but as some parts of it. But in general, I can say that there is one limitation to this research in regard of my research of the city layouts altogether. I'm not an urban planner. I like this topic and I'm interested in like city layouts and stuff. So I had a lot of knowledge on my own, but I did not conduct any methodological approach to analyze relation of the codes and the cities, because for this I would have needed to take some sample of data and information about the cities themselves, and I did not have it, and it also did not fit the scope of my thesis and the time span, unfortunately. But for sure that would be a nice next step here to understand more about relation of the things, to maybe come down to better methods of understanding the cities and the problems, and altogether gender-based violence, because I also did not include any existing data about the current situations in this domain for every particular city. So here I was more interested into the perception of women and how their expectations are, rather than what are exact numbers. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, there is also a thing that sometimes the problem might not be there, but women do not feel safe because it happened once before and they do not want this to happen ever again to them or to somebody else. So yeah, hope that answered it. I think there was some other unanswered question. Oh no, at least in not in Q&A section. Is there anything else you want to ask? Please feel free to drop the question in the Q&A or in the chat. I'm back to the chat, checking it out. And thanks for your kind words about this presentation. It's very important research to me, and I plan to continue it. So if you are doing something in the same domain or are interested in collaboration further on someday, yeah, I would be happy to connect. I think you can connect through the platform or through my email. So. And yeah, I completely agree with the statement that improving the status of women involves improving lives of everyone. That's true. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Okay, so I guess this session is over then. So thanks again, everybody, for your time and interest in the topic. reiterating, I'm very open to connecting, work as a researcher in the Bauhaus University. So yeah, wherever you are, if you're interested in this topic and have ideas or something, would be very happy to talk over like digital coffee or something. And again, thanks to MAXDAYS for organizing this whole event for us to be able to connect and to share research, and for helping me to launch this research on this scale. So yeah, have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye bye.